Saint Cecilia, the greatest Christian rock star. Cecilia is a virtuoso with a small portative organ, with a positive organ, with a cembalo, with a bass violin, with the lute, with the violin, with the harp, as a singer, and with the zither. It seems that Saint Cecilia was a great virtuoso, with many instruments. But is that true? In fact, there is no evidence that Saint Cecilia ever played a musical instrument or ever was a singer. Where do these many pictures of Saint Cecilia with musical instruments now come from? Let's find out. Who was Cecilia, and where did she come from? According to her passion story, which was written in the 5th century, Cecilia was born in Rome in the 2nd century CE. As a young girl she was baptized and wanted to live in virginity, but was forced into marriage by her parents. During her wedding, she sang to God alone in her heart and asked him to let her keep her virginity. With the help of a guardian angel, she was able to keep her virginity. Cecilia refused to renounce her faith. For that, she was sentenced to death. She was hit 3 times with the sword. But Cecilia lived for 3 more days. She was then buried in the Calixto catacombs, outside Rome, near the crypt of the popes. The passion story of Cecilia is most legendary. The story tells of purity, virginity, bravery, pride and resistance. Cecilia's attributes are a wreath of roses or lilies, and the sword, a crown, or a palm leaf, as a sign of her martyrdom. In the year 545 CE, November 22nd, the titular feast of Saint Cecilia was celebrated, in Rome, by Pope Vigilius. One of the oldest illustrations of Saint Cecilia can be found in Ravenna.
Sant'Apollinare Nuovo.
In the central nave, there is a mosaic on both sides. At one side with 22 virgin martyrs, in a procession. Cecilia, as a 6th virgin, from the right. Halo, splendid robe, headdress, white veil, and crown in her hand. Cecilia walks through a meadow of flowers, with palm trees in the background. The mosaic is believed to date back to the 6th century. If there were no names, it would be impossible to tell the martyrs by name. Even Cecilia does not yet have her own attribute. Also from the 6th century is a mosaic of Cecilia in the Archbishop's Chapel, which is also in Ravenna. The chapel is said to have been built around 495. The mosaic dates from the early period. Mosaic of Saint Cecilia. Another Cecilia mosaic from the 6th century is to find in Croatia. The mosaic can be seen in the apse. Cecilia was worshipped very early on in Rome. There were several basilicas that were named after her. her tomb in the catacombs of Callisto was a place of pilgrimage. In the catacombs, in the crypt of Saint Cecilia, there is also a mosaic of Saint Cecilia, dating from around the 6th to 8th century. The mosaic can still be seen today. Saint Cecilia in prayer. In the 9th century, Cecilia's coffin was transferred to the Basilica of Santa Cecilia in Rome by Pope Paschal I. The basilica was said to have been built in the 9th set, on the spot where Cecilia lived and where she died in martyrdom. Cecilia was immortalized on a mosaic in the new basilica. Cecilia is either the second from the left or the first from the right, depending on the interpretation of the scholars. 2nd to 9th century, so far, we have not found a connection or visual representation of Cecilia with music. In the 8th century, parts of the Passion of Cecilia text were included in the Liturgy of the Hours. For the celebration of November 22nd, the day of Saint Cecilia, Passio text, the day for the wedding came, and while the instruments were playing, she sang in her heart, to the Lord alone, with the words, "May my heart and my body be undefiled, so that I may not perish." The liturgy text of the hours, meaning now, to the playing of the instruments, Cecilia sang to the Lord, with the words, "May my heart be undefiled, so that I may not perish." Cecilia, who sang to God in her heart, alone, while the instruments were playing, became Cecilia, who sang to the instruments. From then on, Cecilia was also seen as a musician, as a singer. In the 12th century, the Basilica of Santa Cecilia was given a new entrance area, a portcullis, and a campanile tower. On the mosaic strip of the portcullis, which still exists today, you can see a portrait of Saint Cecilia. Master of Saint Cecilia, altarpiece, 14th century. Until the 15th century, Cecilia was mainly illustrated with a palm branch, martyr's crown, or halo. Saint Cecilia in the Albi Cathedral, France. '15th century, Valerian, Cecilia, and Tiberius. The martyr and saints became more and more, but as on the mosaic in Ravenna, it was still difficult to separate the single virgin martyrs from each other without write to everyone a single name. In order to recognize the saints, who is who, the artists started to paint them now with attributes. But what was the attribute for Cecilia? To recognize her in the middle of other holy, virgin, martyrs. Palm, martyr's crown, rose or lily wreath, angel, and sword. Attributes that were already used by other saints and martyr. In the search for an attribute for Saint Cecilia, someone found it in the text of the Passio Cecilia. And while the instruments were playing, she sang, in her heart, to the Lord alone. Or in the short Vesper variant, to the playing of the instruments, Cecilia sang, to the Lord. Based on this line of text, Cecilia could now be portrayed as a musician, as a singer. However, as singing is difficult to portray as an attribute, another solution was needed. The Latin text reads,
Cantantibus organis,
which roughly means, while the instruments were playing. Organist was an umbrella term for instruments in general. These two words made it possible to place musical instruments near Cecilia, to recognize her now in the visual arts. At the end of the 15th century, the visual artists chose the organ as attribute for Cecilia. The Virgin and Child, with 4 Holy Virgins. Now Cecilia wears a necklace with a small organ as an attribute. It was a clear recognizable attribute. It should be noted that the organ is only an attribute here. Cecilia does not play the organ. Since Cecilia has almost or completely closed her eyes, this scene could refer to the text in her. 15th century. The organ, as an attribute for Saint Cecilia, initially established itself, appearing now more and more often in the surroundings of Saint Cecilia. The organ, of course, represents several instruments combined in one, making it perfect as a representation of the text while the instruments were playing. Another example of the important role played by attributes in the visual arts of the Middle Ages. The Virgin and Child, enthroned, with Saints Michael, Catherine of Alexandria, Cecilia, and Jerome. Without attributes, it would be very difficult to separate these 2 women below the Holy Virgin. Who is who? Now you can already see that a musical instrument was chosen to recognize Cecilia in the pictures of the visual arts, not because she played an instrument, but to be able to separate her from other saints. But in the 16th century, Saint Cecilia was still also illustrated without music or musical instruments in her surroundings. Italy. The interior consists of a single hall, shows a fresco cycle of the Passio Cecilia. Consists of 10 paintings, 5 on each side. In Image 1 to see, The Wedding Scene, by Francesco Francia. Since it is very clear who Cecilia is in the painting, Francesco did not paint an additional attribute, like an organ in the background, or for Cecilia. There is no reference to music or musical instruments in the entire fresco cycle, which maybe means that Cecilia was not associated with music in Bologna at the beginning of the 16th century. There are indications that the illustration of Saint Cecilia with an organ as an attribute first became established in Holland and Belgium, Flanders, around the 15th century, then spread to other European countries, like Italy. But in Italy, Cecilia with organ attributes was quickly adopted. Marquesi was born in Ravenna. He was a student of Francesco Francia and a student of Raphael. The picture was probably painted later than the fresco in the Bologna Oratory. Raphael was commissioned to paint a picture from Saint Cecilia for a chapel in a church in Bologna. The Ecstasy of Saint Cecilia, by Raphael. To see, St. Paul, with the sword, St. John Evangelist, with the eagle, St. Augustine, with the crosier, Mary Magdalene, with the alabaster jar. Raphael adopted the new method to paint Saint Cecilia with an organ attribute. But he also referred to the entire text of the Passio Cecilia while the instruments played. Cecilia's view is directed upwards, where the angels are singing. An ingenious visualization that allows many interpretations. Raphael's Cecilia became an icon and was reinterpreted by other artists. The organ has moved from the background to the hands, but is still drawn as an attribute, recognizable by the fact that Cecilia's fingers never touch the keyboard. But was it really Raphael's idea to paint Cecilia with a portative organ in her hand? Was he inspired by the Dutch Flanders painters, or was Raphael copying an existing portrait of another young woman with a portative organ? Cecilia was not the first woman with a portative organ as a symbol of music. Music, as one of the 7 liberal arts of the Middle Ages, was already illustrated as a woman with a portative organ. Music, as one of the 7 liberal arts, was also illustrated like Cecilia, with musical instruments on the floor. Another inspiration for Raphael for a female portative organ player could have been the Greek muse Polyhymnia. Polyhymnia is one of the 9 muses in Greek mythology. Polyhymnia is the muse of hymn poetry. Trochee series as an organ player. Another painting of the Polyhymnia with a portative organ by Giovanni Santi. Giovanni Santi is Raphael's father. While music and Polyhymnia also played the portative organ themselves, it remained just an attribute for Cecilia. 16th century. In the 15th and 16th centuries, numerous motets were composed in Cecilia's honor. Cecilia was probably chosen in the 16th century as the patron saint of musicians' guilds and music organizations in the Netherlands and Flanders. In her honor, music competitions were held on her feast day on November 22nd. Records show that musical celebrations for Saint Cecilia's Day were held in Antwerp Cathedral as early as 1515. Already in the 16th century, Cecilia played the large positive organ herself. By Bernardino Campi. In 1570, an annual festival in Cecilia's honor was established in Évora, France. 5 years later Paris followed, with an annual Cecilia Festival. (1585), the founding of the
Accademia Nazionale di Santa Cecilia.
In Rome, Italy. Saint Cecilia and Saint Gregory the Great were chosen as patrons for the Accademia. King David playing the harp, with angels dancing, while Cecilia plays the organ, in heaven. In the 15th century, due to 2 words in her Passio, Cecilia was given the organ as an attribute. At the beginning of the 16th century, musical organizations were founded, and Cecilia was chosen as their patron saint. Festivals were celebrated for Cecilia in Belgium and France. In the mid-16th century, Cecilia was now portrayed as a player of the organ. As a Holy Virgin martyr, Cecilia was made the patron saint of music, and then the organ player. Cecilia has now risen to the highest level of Christian musicians. She is now displayed together with King David. David is also known as a shepherd who can play the harp very well. The Book of Samuel calls David a skillful harp player. Organs were drawn around King David from the 12th century onwards. Already with King David, as with Saint Cecilia, in Cecilia Art, the organs quickly moved from the background into the hands of King David. King David plays the portative organ. But since Cecilia is portrayed as organ player, as before, King David was portrayed as a harpist. Cecilia was also now placed on the same leave as Gregory the Great, together as patron of the Academia. Gregory the Great, after which Gregorian chant was named. The ultimate Christian band was born. David, Cecilia, and Gregory the Great. Truth and fiction. Is it possible that Cecilia actually played an organ while she was still alive? As with King David, painted organs appeared early on in Saint Cecilia's surroundings, long before the organ became Cecilia's attribute. Wedding Feast of Saint Cecilia and Saint Valerian. Mostly for the representation of the wedding or the wedding feast scene. Did organs really exist at the time Cecilia lived, in the 3rd century? As shown in the paintings like this one? You can often read that there were no organs at the time Cecilia lived, but you will be surprised. Organs actually already existed in the 3rd century CE. Hydraulic organs have existed in the Eastern and Western Roman Empire since around the 3rd century BC. However, these organs were not very popular with the early Christians, as they were also used in the cruel events in the arenas whereby Christians have died. Julius Pollux, a Greek scholar and rhetorician, reports that from the 2nd century CE there were probably already organs with bellows technology. Unfortunately, there is no record of the pneumatic organs mentioned by Julius Pollux. But they could actually have already existed at that time. All the technical knowledge was available. After the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century CE, knowledge of organ technology was largely lost in the West until the 9th century. So Cecilia could have played the organ in the 3rd century CE? Yes and no. The organ variant, as that we see today in the paintings with Cecilia, were probably not yet developed in the 3rd century CE. Cecilia could have played a Hydraulis organ that already existed in the 3rd century. Even at her wedding, it is possible that a Hydraulis was played. And if the report by Julius Pollux are correct, an organ operated by bellows could also have been played at the wedding. In the Middle Ages, some also claim that Cecilia was the inventor of the portative organ. But records tend to say no. 1599, Basilica Santa Cecilia, Rome. Cecilia's coffin was opened, and her body was found, intact. This miracle was impressively immortalized by the sculptor Stefano Maderno. The statue was placed under the altar and can still be found there today. The relief on the left side shows an interpretation of Raphael's Cecilia. The discovery of the intact body of Saint Cecilia triggered a new Cecilia hype in Rome. The Passio Cecilia around 1601. The statue by Stefano Maderno as the central image. At the top center is a panel showing Cecilia leaning against the organ. An angel playing the organ below Cecilia, as she was portrayed by Stefano Maderno. An organ attribute would not have been needed, but the organ became already an integral part of Cecilia. Guido was commissioned to paint images of Cecilia for the basilica. Coronation of Cecilia and Valeriano. The beheading of Saint Cecilia. In the dome of the Chapel of the Baths, you can see a copy of Raphael's Cecilia by Guido Reni. Saint Cecilia in the 17th century. She almost always plays the latest organ model. Madonna and Child with Saint Catherine of Siena and Saint Cecilia. Domenichino painted a beautiful Cecilia fresco cycle. In two scenes you can recognize an organ. One scene shows Cecilia at home, welcoming her husband, Valerian, after he has been baptized. In another scene, Cecilia ascends to heaven, angels carry an organ up to heaven for her. The Cecilia by Raphael in this chapel is somewhat confusing. It is another copy by Guido Reni. Guido Reni and Domenichino also painted Cecilia with other musical instruments. Cecilia the All-Rounder. At first, organs were illustrated as played at Cecilia's wedding. Then, organs were used as attribute for Cecilia. Afterwards, Cecilia played the organ herself. And at the end of the 16th to the middle of the 17th century, Cecilia also made music at home with different musical instruments. Musical instruments that were before still lying on the floor ended up in the hands of Cecilia. 17th century, Cecilia plays the spinet, harpsichord, Cembalo. Seventeenth century, Cecilia plays the lute. Seventeenth century, Cecilia plays the violin. the number of angels varied, depending on the instrument or song. The angels carried the instruments, played the instruments, escorted Cecilia on instruments. Nevertheless, the painting of Cecilia with an organ remained the most popular. In paintings of scenes from the Passio Cecilia, the organ continued to be painted as an attribute for Cecilia. In the background, or near Cecilia. A portative organ near Cecilia. Very popular was, and still is today, Cecilia as an organ player, at home. The organ has gone to heaven, with Cecilia, mostly carried by angels. In the visual arts, Cecilia continued to play the organ, in heaven. This is not written in the Passio Ceciliae. Saint Cecilia in glory, and angels playing music. It seems that the Church was enthusiastic about the idea of Cecilia taking her organ to heaven, with her. How Cecilia and the organ rise into heaven can be seen impressively in a Roman church. First you see the altar with the painting of Saint Cecilia. Then the view is directed upwards, where you can see Cecilia in heaven, surrounded by angels making music. One of the angels plays the organ. The painting of Cecilia as an organ player became so popular that famous women were portrayed as Cecilia sitting on the organ. Portrait of a lady as Saint Cecilia. Madame de Maintenon as Saint Cecilia. The Accademia was temporarily housed in the Basilica of Santa Cecilia. In the late 17th century, major cities across England marked Saint Cecilia's Day with a musical celebration. The tradition was established most firmly in London. Saint Cecilia's Day celebrations occurred nearly every year from 1683 to 1703. Cecilia's Memorial Day on November 22nd was celebrated in the 17th and 18th centuries by the London Society of Music as a celebration of music, with concerts, church services, and compositions. Polyhymnia, upgrade. Like Cecilia, the Greek muse Polyhymnia and her 8 sisters were also upgraded with new instruments in visual arts between the 15th–17th century. 16th century, contest between the muses and the Pierides. With lots of new instruments and a special organ. Concert of the Muses. The air for the organ is produced by blowing with the mouth and not by bellows. While in Cecilia's organs, the air is produced by bellows, operated by angels. The muses have also been given a harpsichord. Four Muses and Pegasus. Minerva visits the Muses. Let's quick check truth and facts of Polyhymnia. The 9 Muses are daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne. Did they really also play the organ and violin? It would be possible that the Muses maybe played a panpipe because, according to Greek mythology, pan flute was invented by Pan and Pan in turn entered into a musical competition with Apollo, the Kithara, lyre player. And Apollo, the protector of the arts and music, headed the 9 muses. However, a mosaic from the 1st century BCE shows that it was not common to portray a muse with a panpipe, or, as later, with an organ. The Basilica of Santa Cecilia was redecorated with new Cecilia paintings and a new facade. A fresco in the entrance hall probably dates back to the 17th century. You can recognize organs in the background. 1727, Sebastiano Conca painted the ceiling fresco of the central nave. Coronation of Saint Cecilia. Angels play the organ and carry it to heaven. Chapel of the Relics, Luigi Vanvitelli redesigned the reliquary chapel. Vanvitelli also paints organs in the background. The organs painted in the basilica, unlike the other 18th century illustrations, remain in the background as attributes or are played by angels, carried by angels, or floating on clouds. But even in the basilica, the organs have now made it from Cecilia's apartment to heaven. Cecilia is placed as a statue at St. Peter's Square. As one of 140 saints, she stands on the colonnades. On a monument in the Basilica Santa Cecilia, you can see a similar statue of Saint Cecilia. In the 18th century, Cecilia became increasingly popular as an organ player in heaven, even in churches outside Rome. Fresco, Ebersmünster, France. Engelsel, Austria. Italy. Even in a Protestant church, the organ has found its way to heaven. Germany, Ludwigslusttown Church. Annunciation of the birth of Christ to the shepherds by the angel Gabriel. Just like the history of the organ, Cecilia, who began as a small portative organ player, was now developed and stylized as a virtuoso organ player. Even in the 18th century, it was fashionable to be portrayed as Cecilia, playing the organ. Elizabeth Linley as Saint Cecilia. Emma, Lady Hamilton as Saint Cecilia. Cecilia playing the harp in the 18th century. In the 19th century, Cecilia was no longer portrayed with such powerful imagery. Nineteenth century, Cecilia by John Milhuish Strudwick. Music, sweet music, by Evelyn de Morgan. Saint Cecilia, by John William Waterhouse. Saint Cecilia, by Gustav Klimt. A copy of the Cecilia statue, and a copy of Raphael's Cecilia, can be found in the St. Wilfrid's Chapel, in the Brompton Oratory, in London. Cecilia and the organ merged completely in the 19th century, but there are also paintings of Cecilia, where the organ is not used. More to Saint Cécile, Cathédrale de Rouen, France. Cecilia's cultural influence in the 19th century. 1810, Saint Cecilia, or the Power of Music. A Legend, by Heinrich von Kleist. 1826, Franz Xaver Mozart founded the Saint Cecilia Association. 1855, the Cecilia Mass, by Charles Gounod. 1868, foundation of the Cäcilienverband, Germany. Violins and cellos, with the line name, Saint Cécile des Thernes. Special feature, and seal of quality, is the stamp showing Saint Cecilia, with a violin. 19th century, Cecilia and the Harp. Portrait of Mrs. Richard Crowninshield, Derby, as Cecilia, playing the harp. Harp in the background. Cecilia with lyre, by Josephine Kalamata. Saint Cecile Mort, by Etienne Gaudier. Gustave Moreau, Saint Cecilia. Saint Cecilia with string instruments. The Childhood of Saint Cecilia, by Maurice Bartoli Stillman. 20th century. At the beginning of the 20th century, the Basilica of Santa Cecilia was given a new crypt. The relics of Cecilia were replaced in the new crypt. The sarcophagi can be viewed through a window. A copy of the sculpture of Cecilia was placed in the Cecilia crypt in the Callisto catacombs, with a mysterious inscription in memory of Edith Cecilia McBride of New York, USA. Saint Cecilia by Edward Veith. Cecilia by Potocki. Carte Cecilia. America. When America was discovered, Cecilia was not yet the patron saint of church music. The artists just had already begun to paint organs as attribute for Cecilia. In the 15th century, Cecilia became the patron saint of music societies and musical events in Europe. In the 16th century, she became the patron saint of church music. When Cecilia came to America, her image as a patron saint of music was already complete. In South and Central America, Cecilia sitting at the organ is mostly to be seen as iconography. But even more often, you can see Cecilia as a carved harpist. Schools, music bands, districts or entire towns are named after Cecilia. A big music festival, in honor of Saint Cecilia, patron of music, is celebrated throughout Mexico on November 22nd. The mariachi bands assemble in village or town, then they go to church to pray for Saint Cecilia. After there is a big music festival, often with music competitions. The festival lasts one day. In Brazil, there are churches in honor of Saint Cecilia. Church of Santa Cecilia, Porto Alegre, Brazil. On the main altar, you can see Cecilia playing the harp. The architecture of this church is very similar to the first layout of the Basilica of Santa Cecilia in Rome. Igreja de Santa Cecilia, São Paulo, Brazil. Paintings about the life and martyrdom of Saint Cecilia on the side walls of the altar by Benedito Calixto, Brazilian painter. There are probably 6 to 7 painted arches. A 360 altar view on Google Maps. The matching paintings from the internet. Let's take a look at the left side. Three probably shows the baptism of Cecilia in the catacombs. 1 probably shows the baptism of Valerian, Cecilia's husband. That scene takes place in the crypt of the popes in the Callisto catacombs in Rome. Two shows Tiberius behind the curtain, Valerian, angle with roses and lily wreath, and Cecilia. Right side. Four probably shows Cecilia's hearing. 5 shows the struggle for death of Cecilia after she was hit 3 times with the sword. Six probably shows the funeral of Saint Cecilia. That scene takes place in the Callisto catacombs in the crypt of Cecilia, which is right next to the crypt of the popes. Benedito Calixto takes up many aspects of the Passio Cecilia and integrates archaeological knowledge that was known at the time. A magnificent work that also offers much material for discussion. Other paintings by Benedito Calixto are also great, just take a look. I fell in love with them. A brilliant artist. The great Cecilia hype was over in the 20th century. But Cecilia offered, and continues to offer, a lot of inspiration for new impressive works of art like the stained glass window artworks in honor of Cecilia in USA.
Shenandoah to the Atlantic, rivers wide and forests tall, all in one Virginia. For each of us here in Virginia, from farm to city dwelling, all of us we stand together. We're yours, we all are yours, across our great Virginia. You'll always be a great Virginia.
20th century, in the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, Washington, D.C., USA, you can see a mosaic of Cecilia in the Neo-Byzantine style. Can be seen in the central chapel of the West Apse. The text that can be seen are words from the Passio Ceciliae,